Good afternoon. We are right at 12:30, so we will go ahead and get started. We appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon. My name is Ruth Swanson, and I'm the program manager for District 180. And we have some colleagues from across KDE with us here today to share resources and lots of great information to help you as you move forward. So I will turn it over to Trey Smallwood, who is our TSI consultant, to get us started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for this Targeted Support and Improvement webinar for TSI schools. So here's our learning objectives for this webinar. By the end of the session, we want you all to be able to understand the identification criteria for TSI schools. We're going to look at the school improvement requirements for TSI schools. We're going to understand next steps involved in the improvement planning process for TSI schools and become familiar with available supports and resources for TSI schools, regardless of your targeted subgroup. So, big question we're always asked is, why do we identify TSI schools? This is a federal requirement. It comes from the Every Student Succeeds Act, and it requires us to identify schools for TSI specifically because many student subgroups have been historically underserved in education. So these groups often face achievement gaps, and ESSA has mandated states track their performance individually. So when any subgroup in a school underperforms consistently, the school must be identified for TSI to make sure that they have targeted interventions for those students and to foster a more equitable education system. So for fall 2025, we want to talk about why schools were identified. So schools were identified for TSI identification when one or more of the same subgroups performing as poorly as all students in the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools or non-Title I schools by level. And this was for 3 consecutive years. So we base this number on the 2022-2023 data, the 2023-2024 data, and the 2024 and 2025 data. So the bottom 5% cut point by level is applied to the performance or the overall score of each federally defined student demographic group, which you probably will hear us call a subgroup. Here you can see the listed TSI subgroups. They are white, African American, Hispanic or Latino, Asian, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, American Indian or other Alaska Native, 2 or more races, free or reduced price meal eligible students, students with disabilities who have an individual education program or an IEP, and English learners. Some schools may be identified for the performance of multiple subgroups, whether that be 2 or 3 different subgroups. So all TSI schools must have a revised comprehensive school improvement plan with the TSI addendum included. So this will serve as your improvement plan. And so you're going to revise your CSIP with the involvement of local school personnel and other stakeholders. This is, of course, including the principal and other school leaders, teachers, parents, the SBDM, and this is actually in Kentucky law. You can see the revised statute there. And all TSI improvement plans must address all components of the CSIP, including all diagnostics associated with the development of the plan. So whether that be the needs assessment or one of the other diagnostics, it should all be reflective of your TSI status. School stakeholders should carefully consider what must be done in order to ensure that all subgroups perform at the highest levels in the state accountability system. We all want what's best for students, and that's why we're all here. And so the additional requirements addressed in the TSI addendum informs the strategies and the activities within the actual CSIP, and we're getting to that in more specific here in a few minutes. So from a district perspective, the local Board of Education must review every improvement plan, which is also your CSIP, and it must be reviewed and approved by your local Board of Education. This should happen annually as long as your school is identified as TSI. In terms for the local education agency or the district, they're really tasked with the monitoring and support of TSI schools. You can see the KRE, the administrative regulation there that puts this into place, but they're there to ensure ongoing support and the successful implementation of the plan. Also, we'll talk about this in more detail later, but the CDIP must include the TSI and CSI addendum. I'm now going to turn it over to Ruth, who's going to talk about some next steps in improvement planning.
Thank you, Trey. So yeah, we want to take the rest of our time this afternoon to really provide some guidance and lots of resources that can help you take those next steps in your improvement planning. So we, as I said, we have colleagues from across KDE to share with us today. I want to start by thinking about that needs assessment. We know that the needs assessment was due on November 1st, but with your identification and with the final data being available, we know that you likely need to go back and take another look at your needs assessment. We always say that the diagnostics are living documents. They can and should be revised when new information, new data becomes available. So we do encourage you to get back into that needs assessment in light of the subgroups that are targeted for your improvement. And then as well, you want to be sure that the goals and the strategies and activities that are going to be included in your improvement plan really address the needs of all students, but especially those in your targeted subgroup. And with us today, we do have a couple of our continuous improvement coaches. They have lots of experience supporting improvement planning all over the state. So I'll let them introduce themselves and share some information that will be really beneficial for you in determining some possible strategies.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here today. I want to introduce myself. My name is Jenny Donnelly, and I'm here with one of my colleagues, Jewett Wells, and we are part of the continuous improvement coaches at KDE. Some of you may have already worked with us, and if not, we hope we get to work with you soon. We're here today to talk about key core work processes and how we use those in the needs assessment. But at the end of this webinar, you will see a link to information about contacting the continuous improvement coaches. And actually here in a minute, I will go ahead and put in the chat a way to get a look at some of the supports and services we offer. So with that being said, like Ruth said, you're already in the improvement planning process. You've already done your needs assessment. We're all familiar with the key core work processes because they are the critical work that we do in schools on a daily basis. And during that needs assessment, we should have analyzed them to not only find areas that might be of concern or areas to work on, but also to really think about what are the strengths within our building that we might leverage. Let's see. So when you look at your key core work processes, like Ruth said, hopefully you've already turned this in on November 1st, but you might go back and look at what the evidence you wrote and think about it through the lens of your targeted subgroup. So for example, if you have been identified TSI because of your students with disabilities population, then you might go through and look at that definition. We always suggest you read the definition again, calibrate your understanding of that system. And then those guiding questions are really there to help you just think about evidence. What evidence do we have to show that these systems are working well or might have some gaps? And you really want to think about that through the lens of your subgroup. So again, this is just a process we suggest. Am I echoing for some reason? No. Okay, sorry. Ruth, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think you had an echo just for a minute, but I think you're good now.
For a second, I thought I was frozen. Okay, so what I was going to say is we suggest, of course, working with stakeholders, with a leadership team, with teachers, really analyzing these key core work processes to think about the systems within your school, maybe even a highlighting process so that you can rate and really decide what are the areas that you should focus on. I'm going to let Jewett talk just a little bit more about this, but hopefully I get to meet a lot of you in the future. Thank you.
Okay, so just to reiterate what Jenny and Ruth have both been talking about, we hope that when you worked on phase 2 initially for your CSIP development, that you took the time to really dig into these key core work processes. We understand you may not have gone through every single page, read every single question. Also, some of you may have been able to use some of the needs assessment you've done in years past that is continuing and just kind of thinking about through the lens of where were we last year as opposed to where are we now, what has changed. But when we're thinking specifically about your targeted subgroup that has given you the federal classification of TSI, it's really important that we dig in very deeply to think about root causes. So even if you feel good about the needs assessment that you've done so far, you've taken the time to go back, it may be that you just need to go back into the 2 or 3 key core work processes that you really focused your CSIP work around. Maybe you don't need to go through all 6. But for example, if you chose key core work process number 2, instruction, as one of your focus areas for your CSIP, which we're seeing a lot of schools doing due to the HQIR work that they're doing, it may be really good for you to go back to just key core work process 2 and really dig in and think about through the lens of your subgroup. And even once you've gone through the key core work processes, you may need to do a little bit more root cause analysis. If you'll notice, the second bullet on this slide says conduct further root cause analysis if needed. A SWOT analysis is a great tool if you're not familiar with that. It stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So you may ask yourself, within the area of instruction, specifically for our identified subgroup, what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What opportunities might we have that are unique to us within our context, within our community? And then what are some threats that may be unique to us, some things that could be barriers to help prevent us from meeting this subpopulation's needs? So really taking the time to use all of those tools can help you to get a really clear picture of where you are and where you need to be. And I really like that Jenny brought up and made a point about mentioning the stakeholders, because involving stakeholders in that work can lead you to, on the addendum piece that we'll talk about in a little while, Ruth will talk about that in a little while, which is that extra piece that you have to include with your CSIP because of your classification. There are questions about things like resource inequities. There's a question about how you're preparing the leadership of your school and your staff to really meet the needs of this population. So doing this root cause analysis and involving those stakeholders can help you really iron out those details that can help you to complete that addendum piece of your CSIP as well. So it's not just for your CSIP, for your goals and objectives necessarily, but it will also help you to really focus in on that subpopulation and complete that addendum piece that's required. So this next slide talks about the review of your previous plan, which was also a part of phase 2. That was that second question on the diagnostic for phase 2, ask you to review your CSIP from last year and reflect on whether or not you accomplished your goals and objectives and through the activities you set forth last year. So we know that lots of times schools will reuse activities from year to year, which is completely fine because oftentimes initiatives last longer than just 1 year, right? You're carrying them over. But it's really important that, especially if you did find yourself doing that with your CSIP this year, that you go back and think about how are we doing it differently this year than how we did it last year? Because obviously, if you just implemented it the way you did it last year and you just do that again, you're probably not going to reach your goals, especially for your identified subgroups, because we can't just do the same thing every year, we know, and expect to get different results. So really thinking about as you review that previous plan, if you are continuing some of that work, those root cause analysis tools and revisiting that needs assessment can help you think about how you need to refine that work and revise that work and how it needs to look different this year than it did in years past.
All right, thank you, ladies. I will mention that Jenny put a link in the chat. And Trey also mentioned that copies of the slides will be shared after the webinar. We had hoped to provide them during the webinar, but Teams is not playing nicely with us today, so it's not allowing us to attach anything at the moment. But you will get copies of these slides. They have lots of links and QR codes and such in there, so you will get copies of those. So let's talk specifics now about the improvement plan, those additional requirements. It's important to first understand that the CSIP is your TSI improvement plan. It will just have some additional elements on that addendum that Jewett mentioned just a little bit ago. So we'll walk through each of the components in depth, but they include thinking about turnaround leadership and what might be needed for your leadership team. They include identification of any resource inequities, and we'll talk about what resources are and how we determine if they're being used equitably. You will be required to have at least one evidence-based intervention, so some kind of strategy or practice that has research behind it showing that it is indeed effective, especially for students in your targeted subgroup. And then there's a section about some additional actions that might address the causes for underperforming. So we'll take a look at your learning environment and what that is like for students in your targeted subgroup, and if there are things that we could do to better support their learning in there. So this is a screenshot of what the addendum looks like. So you'll see that each of those 4 components I just mentioned are listed on here, and there are questions to consider when you are thinking about each of these areas. So you'll notice there's a question to consider, and then there's a place for you to actually respond. And it's important to remember when you go to respond to these, that some of them have more than one question within that section. So do be sure that you are reading carefully and answering each one of the questions that are included in there. This addendum can be downloaded from our Comprehensive Improvement Planning webpage that is part of the KDE website. And then once you've completed the responses on here, you're going to think about how those strategies and activities need to show up in your CSIP, and you will upload both the revised goal building template and the addendum with your responses on it. So that goes in the Cognia platform, whether you call it the SIP, eProve, My Journey, all the same thing. So those 2 things will get uploaded. So let's break down each of those categories. And I'd like to start by just having you think for a moment, what comes to mind when we bring up this idea of turnaround leadership? If you'd like to share in the chat, please feel free to do that. Or otherwise just kind of reflect internally, what comes to mind around turnaround leadership? So here is that section from the addendum, and what it asks you to consider is how you will ensure that the school leadership has or develops the skills and disposition to achieve accelerated, meaningful, and sustainable increases in student achievement for underperforming subgroups. So those descriptors in there that are talking about accelerated, meaningful, sustainable, those actually come from Kentucky statute. So you can see here that KRS 16346 defines turnaround as a comprehensive transformation. And then it has those words accelerated, meaningful, and sustainable increases in student achievement. And the other important element of this definition is that those increases come through improved school leadership as well as district support, which we know are 2 key responsibilities in the TSI process, as Trey shared earlier. So taking a look at turnaround leadership, one of the other places that we look for guidance are the professional standards for educational leaders, or the PSEL standards. If you are a principal or an evaluator of principals, you're familiar with these standards. And Standard 10 specifically talks about turnaround leadership indicators. And so Standard 10 states that effective educational leaders act as agents of continuous improvement in order to promote each student's academic success and well-being. And then they list multiple areas where effective leaders can make a difference in this continuous improvement process. So as we go through here, I'm not going to read through, the entire list of these, but I will say that this is a great self-assessment opportunity to inform your response to how you're going to ensure or build turnaround leadership in your leadership team. We'll take a look at a few. For example, on this slide, letter C talks about preparing your school and community for improvement. So when we're talking about going back and looking at your needs assessment, when we're talking about thinking about what's not working and making changes, change is hard. And so as a leadership team, are you prepared to really prepare your school community, whether that be staff, students, or parents and the like? So that's one of the areas that you might want to be thinking about in terms of turnaround leadership. On this slide, letter G talks about data systems. And so we know that there's an idea out there that's very popular. It says systems are designed to get the results they get, meaning that the outcomes of any system are really the result of those processes and components, whether that is intentional or unintentional. And so Jenny and Jewett described a process for using the key core work processes to look at your processes. And so thinking about data, there's key core work process 3, which is about designing and delivering assessment literacy, if that is a need for your staff and for your leadership to be able to lead that process. And key core work process 4 covers reviewing, analyzing, and applying data results. This is one area that we find a lot of teams struggle with, knowing how to use the data to actually adjust instruction. So think about, how is your leadership team prepared to be able to support that? And then we'll take a look at one more here. Letter J says that effective leaders develop and promote leadership among staff. So remember, one of the responsibilities that Trey shared was about the involvement of school personnel and other stakeholders in this revision process. So does your leadership team need to work on increasing stakeholder involvement in some way? So we briefly touched on what the idea of turnaround leadership is. We shared some things that effective leaders do. So take just a minute and think about how you might answer that leadership question. Again, you can jot it down in the chat or just think to yourself, what might you include in your response? And are there certain elements from that standard 10 that really just kind of jumped out at you as, yes, this is an area we're really strong in, or this is an area that we need to build some capacity in? I appreciate one respondent talking about leadership that understands the urgency of issues. Urgency is a big thing. We know from the definition of TSI that these subgroups have been low performing for several years now. So we are at an urgent point. Another respondent talked about focused group of stakeholders and having that goal of creating systems for improvement. So let's take a look at a few examples of how a school might answer these questions about the leadership. So this particular school said that they were going to focus on a comprehensive leadership development strategy, that they were going to emphasize both skills and mindsets. So they're going to look at having some targeted professional development. So their school leaders are going to participate in this ongoing PD. They're going to have some coaching and mentoring opportunities. So the leadership team is going to work closely with instructional coaches and other district supports. And then they're really going to look at upping their tracking and accountability system. So they're going to set clear and measurable goals, and they're going to regularly monitor those with review cycles. So the next additional requirement asks you to look at how resources are currently allocated and used. And is there something in that process that might be creating barriers for students in your targeted subgroup? So the question asks you to describe a process that you use to review this. So you want to talk about what data did you look at who was at the table when you were doing this review. And then you want to identify any inequities that you uncovered, and more importantly, how you're going to address those. So let's take a closer look at what we mean by equity and resources. So there's a couple of important terms here. Equity means that students have access to resources, support, and opportunities based on their needs. So not that everybody has the same opportunities, but opportunities are based on their needs. And so we also want to look at the definition for resources, because that can include both assets and just capacity to be able to fulfill the needs of that learning group. So a lot of times we can consider things like materials, resources can be digital, human resources. So as you review your resources, you want to keep those definitions in mind. And if we put those two together, we come up with this idea that resource equity refers to the allocation and use of resources, which we can include people, time, and money, to really create student experiences that enable all children to reach those learning outcomes. And so we're talking about things like time, schedules, the actual instructional materials, rigorous content, and quality teaching. So you really want to be considering, do students in your targeted subgroup have access to the time that they need, to the materials that they need? Do schedules allow for both core instruction as well as specialized instruction? Are the materials that are used updated and rigorous and meet the needs of that targeted population? So those are some of the things that you want to think about and review when you're doing this. We partner with Cognia for a lot of our school improvement work. And so one of their standards speaks to resources. So standard 15 says that learners' needs drive the allocation and management of human, material, digital, and fiscal resources. So it talks about the professional staff really engaging in this systemic process of looking at data in order to inform how and where they spend their resources. And so adjusting the allocation doesn't mean that you budget and you use your resources the same way every year just because that's the way we've always done it, right? So a lot of times Title I might get budgeted the same way year after year, but have we really taken the time to look at the data and to determine, are we getting the results that we need from our current use of those funds? And might we need to do something different with them in order to support those struggling students? Is your schedule allowing all students to have quality teaching and have them accessing rigorous core instruction? So those are some of the areas that you want to be thinking about and reviewing with your stakeholders in this process. So we'll take just a minute here again to kind of reflect. Now that we've talked just briefly, we know about resource and equity, kind of think about how you might answer that question, or maybe think about what your process is going to be in order to look and review at how you're allocating and spending your resources. So we do have some examples to share with you. This particular school talks about how their SBDM council and their leadership team review school budgets. They review school schedule, the master schedule, and really think about, are they meeting the needs of their targeted subgroup, which for them is students with disabilities. So what they found out in reviewing this information is that many of their students with disabilities remain in resource settings. And so they're not getting the core instruction that they need. And so they've identified ways to address this. in that resource inequities, they also mentioned that staff aren't fully prepared yet to do co-teaching. So one of the ways they're going to address this is by training and coaching in that co-teaching model. They're going to do that during the winter and the spring, and then with the ultimate goal of more students receiving core instruction through this co-teaching model. And so using grade level materials with accommodations, and then they're going to use walkthroughs to help monitor proper implementation. Are the things that they've learned being used in the classroom moving forward? So they also mentioned that they're going to be hiring a position to focus on post-secondary readiness, especially for their students with disability. So that indicator would have been a low one and a need that they identified during that needs assessment process. So here's another example. This school outlined their process. Says that they use a data-driven approach that includes student achievement data, and the data that they collect and analyze is how teachers and support staff are distributed, so that master schedule, how instructional time is used, how school funds are allocated across programs, but particularly those that impact the underperforming subgroup. And then they've also determined that they need to work on stakeholder involvement. So school and district leadership, teachers, and the SBDM are going to collaborate in this review process to really ensure all perspectives are combined or considered. And so then through their analysis, they identified several resource inequities that could be contributing to their underperformance. So they noted that certain subgroups had less access to experienced and certified teachers, that instructional time was disproportionately allocated to non-core subject, particularly in classes with high numbers of students from underserved groups. And then they also realized that funding just wasn't sufficiently targeted towards programs supporting their English learners and their students with disabilities. So because of that, here's how they're going to address that. They're going to look at redistribution of their staff. They're going to take a look at how time is used in both in the schedule and then in classrooms itself. They're really going to look at targeting funding, in particular, additional tutoring for English learners and students with disabilities. And then they also definitely talk about monitoring and making adjustments. So they're going to continuously monitor the impact. They're going to be tracking resources, student performance, and then provide opportunities for stakeholder meetings to provide input about how things are going. So when you think about these responses to how they're going to address these issues, we should see those show up as activities in their CSIP, in the strategies and the activities that they're going to do. So keep that in mind as you go along. So the third requirement asks you to review the learning culture. So what is school and classroom experience like for students in your targeted subgroup? So again, the question asks you to describe a process that you used to review the learning culture specifically related to your targeted subgroup, and then any additional actions that you determined would be necessary to work on that. So let's break that down a little bit more. Again, Cognia has a section in their standards that addresses the culture of learning. And so they see keys to creating a culture of learning is that stakeholders are actively engaged and supportive of the institution's mission. Learners' academic and non-academic needs and interests are the focal point, and that stakeholders are included and supported. So again, being TSI, we want to think about this from the lens of our subgroup stakeholders. If EL is our targeted subgroup, how are we engaging and supporting the parents and the families? If students with disabilities is our subgroup, how are we engaging that community, those families in this improvement process and in the learning process? Who are the stakeholders and how are they supported and involved? There's also a performance standard that talks about what a leader does to cultivate a culture that demonstrates respect and fairness for all leaders. And so it mentions that leaders model the attributes and implement practices that really shape and set clear expectations for staff, and that leaders and professional staff really implement practices, processes, and decision-making that have those values of respect and fairness for all learners. So here's an example of how someone might respond to this section in the addendum. So it says that they used a combination of data analysis and direct input from the school community. So they reviewed survey data, KSA data, and they had focus groups. So they conducted a school climate survey, they had student focus groups, and these efforts helped to understand kind of gaps in their sense of belonging and engagement is what they determined. So regular classroom observations were used, and they paired that with analysis of data. And so they wanted to focus on whether culturally responsive teaching was evident and if student subgroups were accessing resources equitably. So this also allowed them to identify disparities in how students had access to advanced coursework and certain discipline incidences that had disparities in them. So then, most importantly, they have addressed how they're going, additional actions that they're going to take to address this. So they're going to have some instructional training for culturally responsive instruction. They're going to increase student voice, especially among those students in those targeted subgroups. So they're going to do that with student focus groups, family engagement, and then they say by focusing on these actions, they aim to improve the learning experience and the academic outcomes for all students, particularly those in the underperforming subgroups. So again, these additional actions that they've determined, those will show up as strategies and activities in their CSIP, as well as in the response on the addendum. So we come to the final requirement, additional requirement, and that is that your revised CSIP must include at least one evidence-based strategy or practice that you're going to implement. And you want to make sure that this evidence-based practice has been shown to be effective with students like yours. So if you're targeted subgroup is English learners, you want to look for something that has shown to be effective in learning for English learners. So after you've identified the needs through your needs assessment process, including that key core work process analysis that the coaches talked about, you'll need to do some research. And so you want to find out what programs or instructional models and strategies have been proven effective for students in the subgroup that you're targeting. So before you determine the evidence-based practice, you'll need to drill down. As a TSI school, the second question here is really critical. So what instructional practices have been effective for students in your subgroup? I'm going to back up here just a minute. Question one asks about what specific needs do students in your subgroup still have? So it's important, if students with disabilities is your targeted subgroup, you have all kinds of categories within there. You might have some that have actual reading disabilities. You may have some who are receiving speech and language services. So how are those different, and how are their needs different according to that? So really drilling down into what specifically your students need. If English learners is your population, what is it that needs to be a focus? Is it literacy? Is it math? Is it language acquisition? Those are all different things and require different actions and strategies. So really drilling down into, like Jewett said, the root causes and what your students really need. And then you also want to kind of think about all teachers and then specialists. There are certain things that all teachers can do in core instruction. And then there are certain things that specialists should do when they have specific time with students. So be thinking about how that might look different. So here's an example of a response for the evidence-based practices. So this particular school mentioned that they did see some increases in certain areas, but they still have definite areas for improvement. So through research, previously they had used collaborative teaching models. So they said that they are going to continue with those collaborative teaching models, but they're going to really make sure that staff training is focused on specifically parallel teaching and station teaching, and that implementation is going to be monitored, and instructional coaches are going to do that. They also mentioned the name and claim strategy because they're looking to boost student motivation and take care of some behavior issues, attendance, and those types of things. And then they specifically lay out how they're going to monitor this. There's going to be walkthroughs by the school and district staff, tells how often. There's going to be student surveys to kind of gauge improvements in the school culture. And then they're going to have monthly meetings to really kind of look at their goals, identify the needs, and provide additional support. So again, we should see these activities in the CSIP goal building template, if these are what has been determined that you're going to do moving forward. So this is a picture of the table that is on the TSI addendum. So it asks you to list what evidence-based activity it is that you've chosen to implement. It says at least one, and we do suggest that you start with one. If you're really thinking about fully implementing, fully supporting, and fully monitoring something, one is probably a plenty to get started with, definitely. So it asks you to name it. It asks you to provide a citation. So anybody who looks at your school improvement plan should be able to access the study that you based this on. So make sure if you can provide a link, or if you have the correct citation, somebody should be able to copy and paste that in a search engine and be able to pull up that study that you used. We did notice that this last column in here that says uploaded in CSIP should not be there. It's not on the addendum. So I apologize for that being on the slide. You do not have to upload that particular study or any other documentation with it, but you'll name the activity and you'll provide a citation so that that study could be accessed. So evidence-based practices could be and has been a webinar in itself, but we wanted to provide you with just some additional resources to get you going and thinking about evidence-based practices. So there is a pre-recorded webinar that is a couple years old now, but it still has accurate information in there. We have a web page dedicated to evidence-based practices on the KDE website. And then there's a resource that talks about all the different clearinghouses and the databases that you can access in order to find information and studies on these evidence-based practices. So we've talked about how these things should show up in your CSIP. And so on the screen now is a screenshot of what that goal building template looks like. It includes the reading and math, and it includes achievement gap as those two required areas. That may be the only two areas that you need to address in order to support your TSI plan, especially in the achievement gap area. That's definitely an area where you could, list strategies and activities for those low performing subgroups. But if let's say you're a high school and post-secondary readiness for your targeted subgroup is an issue, that may need to be added as an optional goal area on your goal building template in order to get these activities and strategies outlined for your particular subgroup.
So now we're going to talk about some of the specific considerations for districts in the Comprehensive District Improvement Plan. So districts with schools identified for TSI must monitor and provide support to the school to ensure that the successful implementation of that school improvement plan. That's in Kentucky Administrative Regulation. So you can see that citation there. And the local Board of Education must review and approve the revised school improvement plan, also the CSIP, for the TSI schools. So here you can see those questions that's going to be in the addendum. There is only one addendum for TSI, ATSI, and CSI for districts, but you will only answer the ones that apply to your district. So for example, for monitoring and support. So it says, describe the district's plan for monitoring and supporting the school improvement plan for any schools identified for TSI or ATSI, and include in your response information regarding the process for local board review and approval. We understand that this deadline of January 1st is a tight one to get the CSIP and the CDIP put in the system. That is established by statute, so we cannot change the date. However, if you can get into the system and then it comes up for board approval in January, that's okay, because this is a living document, so you can go back and edit anything in the CSIP or the CDIP after the board approves it. So here's some examples for monitoring and support. This is one district's plan. You can see they talked about having a regular monitoring cycle. So they went in and said that they're going to do quarterly reviews of school improvement plans, analyze implementation data, and student performance data. They also have support teams for schools that are identified as TSI, and they're talking about stakeholder engagement as well. If in the future a school does not exit TSI, you will be asked to answer an additional question, but I think we're good to go ahead and move on since this is everyone's first year. So up next, we are lucky to have the Office of Special Education and Early Learning here to share some resources. So we have Amanda Waldrop with us, and she's going to walk you through some of their resources.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name again is Amanda Waldrop. I'm the Assistant Director of the Division of IDEA Implementation and Preschool, and I'm just going to share with you some resources available through our office to support students with disabilities. So just to kind of show you where some of the resources are available on our web page, if you go to the KDE web page, you can access them by clicking Exceptional Children and Early Learning at the top. From there, it's going to narrow it down to a group of subcategories. And within those subcategories, you'll click special education and then guidance and resources. And then once you click that, you'll see that there's behavior resources to support students with disabilities, as well as instructional resources. And that is where everything is located that I will be sharing today. So additionally, all of the resources can be accessed through this handout that's on the screen, and that'll also be shared with you all. So you can access through the QR codes on that handout with your phone. And then there's also hyperlinks embedded within the electronic version. So feel free to print and share this resource and with staff at your schools. And so just kind of going through that handout and all the different resources that are on there, we have a set of math resources designed to support students with disabilities. So this includes a video series for teachers that demonstrates how to use math manipulatives to provide concrete hands-on learning experiences. And so, you know, a lot of times with manipulatives, we typically think of them kind of being associated with elementary classrooms, but they can also be highly effective for middle and high school students as well. And so the videos in this series are demonstrations based. So you'll actually see a teacher modeling how to use these manipulatives with instruction. And they offer creative tips for making manipulatives using everyday materials. That way, if you don't have those manipulatives around your school, you can make them, you know, using paper or buttons or just any other household items that are kind of laying around. And additionally, this series includes guidance on how to differentiate and adapt the activities to meet a variety of student needs. Currently, there's 5 videos available featuring demonstrations. Some of those include, number lines, counters, fraction manipulatives. But these videos are concise, and they're 4 to 6 minutes in length. We wanted to try to make them short, bursts of information that you could gather, pretty quickly. And so again, they can be accessed using the QR code on the screen. And they're going to be the last 5 videos on the page. So if you scan that QR code, you'll see kind of a long list of different videos. But if you scroll to the bottom, they're the last 5 ones on there. And so you can, again, get through that through the QR code on the screen. You'll be able to get it through the PowerPoint as well as that handout. And we're going to add more videos throughout the school year as well. And so in addition to the math manipulative videos that we also have some other math focused videos designed to support students with disabilities. This series showcases the application of 8 mathematics teaching practices through modeled lessons. So each video features a teacher delivering a brief instructional segment using avatar students, providing a demonstration of each practice. And so the series spans a wide range of grade levels. It goes from preschool through high school. And so you can actually see a clip of the video on the screen there. It's actually taken directly, and you can see a teacher, and you can also see the avatar students on there. And then we also have all the videos that I'm sharing with you today also have ASL interpretation on them as well to help support accessibility. And so these videos, you'll see that kind of as a trend throughout all the videos that I share with you today. They're all very concise. They're only about 5 minutes long. And again, they can be accessed using the QR code on the last slide that I shared with you. They're actually the top set of 10 videos at the top, and at the bottom, you'll see the manipulative videos. And again, we're going to add more of these. So, feel free to check back at that link regularly because we'll have more throughout the school year. Then we also have some literacy resources as well. There is a 4-part video series on literacy strategies, which includes topics, such as language comprehension, phonological awareness. And so the videos model a teacher demonstrating a quick snapshot of a lesson. So they're very similar to the videos that I just shared with you. You'll see a teacher modeling the practices with avatar students. All the videos are under 15 minutes. There's also a foundational literacy toolkit as well that includes effective literacy practices and resources. And these are all available, at that QR code. You'll see on that webpage, you'll see literacy resources, and they're right there. They're the first couple of links on that webpage. And then next on the handout, we have behavior resources as well. So the QR code will take you to a video series developed for special education teachers, focusing on effective classroom strategies to support students with disabilities. Currently, there's 9 videos available, and they each cover, a variety of topics. And some of those are shown on the slide there as far as some of the examples that we have. And so these videos highlight practical approaches for creating a supportive classroom environment, and they also have some strategies to help meet students' needs. And so again, the videos are concise. They're only about 5 to 10 minutes in length, and they're just really designed to help deliver targeted information efficiently. And each of these videos are available on the Behavior Resources to Support Students with Disabilities webpage on the KDE website, and it'll be hyperlinked on that handout, and you can also access it through the PowerPoint as well. And so this is just a brief example of one of the videos in the series, just so you could see a few slides as far as what they look like. This is video 9, supporting bus behavior. This video highlights key content related to transportation settings. And so it explores common reasons that students may display challenging behaviors during bus rides. It also introduces tools that help create a more structured and secure environment for students, and it helps to outline strategies for fostering collaboration between educators and transportation staff. And so all of the videos within the series all have, similar structures. They have just, different tips and strategies throughout. And so the last item on the handout that you all will get is a video series on Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. UDL is a proactive framework that helps all learners succeed by removing barriers and offering flexible ways to learn. And so the UDL video series provides an overview of some of the principles of UDL, and we'll continue to add more of those throughout the school year. And so within the videos, you'll see a sample from a lesson, similar structure as the other ones, where you'll get to see like a modeling with a teacher and the avatar students. And so these videos are available on the, at the QR code on the screen, as well as in the handout and the PowerPoint. And so the resources shared today represent just a few of what's available to support students with disabilities. You heard me mention the instructional resources webpage earlier. It has many of the resources that I've shared with you. In addition to the videos, there is a math toolkit to support students with disabilities that provides information on the 8 mathematics teaching practices that we talked about earlier. And so this toolkit features a walkthrough instrument developed in collaboration with stakeholders across the state that helps to measure the implementation of the practices. And then there's also some resources on specially designed instruction as well. And so in addition to our web-based resources, OCL has launched a free professional learning community designed to support special education teachers called the Kaleidoscope Project. And the reason it's called Kaleidoscope is because, think about a kaleidoscope, it uses reflection to create colorful patterns. And so this initiative really emphasizes the power of reflective practice in teaching. And so by examining instructional methods, student feedback, and outcomes, educators help to refine their approach, which helps to create visible, meaningful change in special education. And so the Kaleidoscope Project focuses on specially designed instruction, or SDI, in the areas of math, literacy, and behavior. And so what's really cool about this project is that each participating teacher receives a classroom kit at the conclusion of the community of practice that's filled with manipulatives tailored to support instruction in math, literacy, and behavior to help with delivering specially designed instruction. And so registration is currently open for summer 2026 and the fall 2026 cohort. So if you have any teachers that are interested in registering, they can visit the Kaleidoscope webpage, which is on the screen there through the QR code. And I'll also put that link in the chat as well. But if you go to the Kaleidoscope webpage, you can find out more information about the Kaleidoscope Project. And then the registration information is on that right-hand side of the webpage. You'll see there's a link to click to register. And so these are just some of the benefits of teacher participation in the Kaleidoscope Project. We've received really great feedback from educators in our first cohort. And so as a result, we started a second cohort, which we're currently in right now. And so we're also going to be offering that summer and fall 2026 cohort that I just talked about earlier for special education teachers across the state. So again, you can learn more about this through the QR code in the previous slide, and I'll also put it in the chat. And then there's also an article in Kentucky Teacher as well about the Kaleidoscope Project. So feel free to look that up in Kentucky Teacher, and you can learn a little bit more about that as well. All right, so if you have any questions about any of the resources that I've shared with you today, please feel free to reach out to Veronica Sullivan or myself. You can see our contact information on the screen. And so I really appreciate you all taking time just to hear about some of the resources that we have available. So I'll turn it back over.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And next up, we are lucky to have colleagues as well out of the Office of Teaching and Learning. So I will let Mickey Ray Marinelli introduce herself and share her resources.
Thank you, Ruth. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As she said, my name is Mickey Marinelli. I serve as Chief Academic Officer in the Office of Teaching and Learning at the KDE. And our vision within the OTL, as we call it, is supporting schools and districts in implementing grade level learning for all students. And to do that, we've built out this vision and this visual that we hope sort of helps to show the pathway or change our theory of action. And we begin by looking at the strengthening of Tier 1 by having a common instructional vision in place. And then the gray areas are really the bridge work that are in place to support the resulting improved student experience and outcomes. And so the resources that I'll be sharing with you this afternoon are going to fall within that bridge work. So the first one there, access to strong local curriculum that's grounded in a high quality instructional resource. That next step, providing the high quality professional learning or curriculum based professional learning to support teachers in understanding the why behind that resource and also implementing it with effectiveness. And then that next step, just having mechanisms in place to ensure that all students are having access to consistent grade level, high quality instruction. And then ultimately, again, the desired outcome there, both improving the experience for students that you're serving and supporting, but also seeing the impact on increased outcomes. On the next slide, I'm going to begin with just a few considerations. So if you do not currently have a high quality instructional resource in place, that we have supports for that. And so the curriculum development process is the first section of the model curriculum framework. And it has 4 phases that will lead you through the full process of evaluating and selecting the resources, but then also the implementation supports that would need to result or follow from that. In phase 2, I wanted to point out a few things for you. So it's been mentioned more than once about stakeholder engagement, stakeholder feedback. There is much work that needs to happen to ensure that everyone feels as if they have a voice within the process. A lot of times teachers and others will express dissonance with the resources if they don't align to local priorities and if they're not able to understand the value add or the why behind the evidence basis that's embedded within that resource. And so we have templates for communication plans. We have vendor questions that are embedded within phase 2. And then to speak a little bit more about that instructional vision, and wonderings about, do you have a district level instructional vision for reading and writing, for mathematics, for science, et cetera? Does that translate down to the school level? Is that work that needs to be conducted or refined? Within the CDP, we do include samples from Kentucky districts. And so therefore, there are some for social studies, reading and writing, math, and science. And so you may want to take a look at those if you're just curious how other systems are establishing the expectations for high quality instruction. And so I hope that will be helpful. We had districts participating in HQIR pilots, as well as some of our network meetings. And so we've been able to curate some quality samples for review. The next thing on that slide, we do have approved K through 12 instructional resource lists for both reading and writing and mathematics. Beyond that, we are building out a recommended list. So we have statutory authority to support approved lists for reading, writing, and math, but we wanted to be able to offer supports around science as well. And so we're in the process of building out a list that'll be a bit more explicit just in terms of the recommended resources for science. But you can see there, beyond just the approved lists, we have consumer guides in place for reading and writing, math, and for science. And this really comes into play in phase 3. The value of those consumer guides is that it delineates the markers of high quality for each specific content area. So if you're curious how we have been able to establish the K through 12 list for reading and writing HQAR, that consumer guide will show you the markers that had to be met for reading and writing in order for those resources to be deemed of high quality. So I hope that that will be helpful for you if you are just starting this process or starting to scale and expand the work that you've done around HQIR. On the next slide, this is more for folks who have a resource already in place, but you're working to deepen implementation. And so that work really lives within phase 4 of the curriculum development process. We have leadership tools to support you in setting implementation goals, and building out a PL plan, at establishing quarterly or end of year step backs to take stock of where you are and then begin thinking about implementation goals for the future. One of the things, if you have heard nothing else thus far, I want to point out the curriculum implementation framework tool. So we have had more positive feedback in the OTL around this resource than the many others. And I think it's because we delineate by role and responsibility the moves that district leaders can take, that building principals, that teachers and even students can take at each phase of curriculum implementation. So there's a section for launch PL when you have a brand new resource and you're just rolling it out to teachers and allowing students and parents and families to engage with that resource. There is actions for early implementation, so years 1 through 3, and then ongoing sort of 3 and beyond. And it's been useful, especially in our network experiences, with getting folks to think about, okay, this is where we are. We have completed these actions, but we definitely need to make some targeted moves and next steps. We've had other districts who very, very transparently have said, we didn't do a great launch of this resource. So they've discovered we need to go back and kind of reboot our whole process. And that's okay. You know, this is weighty work. It is hard work, but it does ensure that students would have consistent access to grade level learning that's aligned to our Kentucky academic standards. The last resource on this particular side is our curriculum-based professional learning guidance. And within that, we have structuring PL cycles, we have learning walk protocols. So these tools are targeted at supporting curriculum-based professional learning, not only in shared learning opportunities, but in PLC environments, in coaching conversations and feedback that would happen with administrators, with teachers, and with instructional coaches. And so that's something just to, maybe highlight if you are a little bit further along in your implementation phase for your resource. On the next slide, I've got 2 resources that are particularly of importance for our conversation today. The first one is our intellectual preparation guidance. And so this takes PLC processes and it shows you how you could use protocols to support teachers in better understanding the resource and also strengthening the instructional practice that is up in the application of the learning of that resource. So there's unit internalization protocols available for math, reading, writing, and science. The same for lesson internalization. There's a lesson rehearsal protocol for lessons that are particularly complex that teachers may want to practice together or process together in PLCs in advance of implementation. And then a student work analysis. So with your, that might be a formative task within a lesson that's super important for being able to provide feedback to students before moving forward, or that may be around the curriculum embedded assessment piece. And so there are varying options there. But I think in our conversation today, we are hearing that a lot of districts are implementing, or at least starting to implement, unit and lesson internalization in PLCs. But maybe, some of the work needs to think about, the scheduling of those meetings. Do you have all of the right folks at the table? Do your special education teachers, do your English language development teachers have access to the Tier 1 comprehensive resources? Are they in the PLCs with the core teachers who are delivering that instruction to better equip them to support the co-teaching that is likely needing to happen in Tier 1 and beyond? And so I think that some of those protocols can help to allow for rich conversation. These are not intended to be compliance-based mechanisms. These are intended to promote an engaged discussion around the HQIR that you are currently utilizing. The second bullet there, the instructional practice guides, those are observation tools. And so they're not meant to be evaluative in any way. They're meant to support, again, coaching and feedback and reflection. There's one available for K3 reading foundational skills, K12 reading comprehension, and then one for mathematics and one for science. And what we found in the schools where we have our school-based literacy coaches, pretty regularly, the coach and the building administrator and most often a district leader will go through, and it allows them to see just some higher level trends that they may want to address in shared learning experiences within PLCs. It also helps to identify sort of model classrooms where other teachers may want to go to see, a teacher leader or someone who's doing just effective implementation or strong co-teaching and other work that's happening across the building. On the next slide, I wanted to give you just a place to start because we've provided you with such so much information and rich information today. If you have an HQIR in place, the first bullet there, the continuous improvement playbook for curriculum implementation, it sort of takes everything that I've said and gives you a streamlined pathway for the key actions, utilizing the tools that I've just mentioned. So you may want to make a note of that, put a star beside that. I really feel like that's the most helpful tool that I'm sharing in our conversation with you today. The second one, the monitoring toolkit, that may be something that, if you are in ongoing implementation and you're not seeing the movement in all student groups that you would like to see, there are some observation tools there. There's one for shared learning. There's one for PLCs. There's a student perception survey, a teacher survey that can help you to sort of diagnose some of the issues that may be arising that need to be addressed that would lead to either technical changes or maybe some kind of heart adaptive changes that need to take place so that folks really understand what high quality instruction looks like, what the expectations for students are, and how teachers can better meet the diverse needs of students across your school or across your system at large. On the next slide, I wanted you just to have the OTL points of contact. So that's my email address at the top. If nothing else, if you have a question, please reach out anytime. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I certainly am happy to connect you with folks that I feel could best support you. I've got Christy Biggerstaff here. She's our Director of Early Literacy. And Christy's leading our work around the Kentucky Reading Academies, the letters training, our Kentucky Early Literacy Leadership Network, and then all of our work with the school-based literacy coaches. So she's there for you as a resource. Fox DeMosey and Misty Higgins, they are our professional learning coordinators and have worked very hard to curate, adapt, and design the resources that I've shared with you today. And so they were critical in the model curriculum framework and that curriculum development process. And Misty and Fox are actually starting to do a bit more technical assistance, so a lot of systems level supports. So you may have questions around setting implementation goals or supporting PLCs with unit and lesson internalization. And so they would be a wonderful resource for you in kind of thinking through the systems moves that would need to be in place to ensure that that's set up to be successful. Crystal Rowland in the Division of Program Standards, she serves as the director. If you have standards related questions or questions about MTSS, she would be a good touch point for you. And I'm thrilled to say, as of this fall, we now have a multilingual learner specialist within the Office of Teaching and Learning. So Will Spalding has joined us from Warren County Public Schools. And Will is now serving as a statewide support for multilingual learning. And so his contact information is there. I know that might be especially important if that is the subgroup for which you are working towards continuous improvement. And then lastly, Chelsea Tingle, she is our new Director of Mathematics Education. Chelsea came to us from Henry County Public Schools, where she was Assistant Superintendent and Chief Academic Officer. And she is leading our supports around numeracy counts. And much of that work is going into place in 26-27. And so anything around the approved screeners and diagnostics, the mathematics improvement plan, Chelsea will be a great resource for you. But above all, we truly see ourselves as being a service provider. We want to be a support to you. So please let us know if there's anything we can do to support you in this important work. So thank you, Ruth.
Thank you. And I hope you all are seeing lots of resources that are there for you to help guide you in your thinking as you're developing that school improvement plan. So I'll let Trey kind of finish us out for today.
We just have a few more resources and things we want to offer you all. One thing here is our rubrics for the CSIPs and the CDIPs. Not every district or every school gets monitored every year by our team. However, this is a great self-assessment tool for you to use as you're working with your CSIP or your CDIP. You can go through and check to make sure you have all the elements and looking at the specifics of what meets expectation and what does not. You can find these both on our webpage, and it's also linked here in the slides. We wanted to also give you lots of resources from the District 180 team and the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support. So you can see the first link is our TSI web page. We also have continuous improvement coaches who are here, and they talk to you and give you the link in the chat for their services. We also offer a continuous improvement review. So this is when someone from the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support, a team of our education recovery staff, will partner with your school to do some evaluations of systems and offer some feedback to your school of some things you can partner with us to work on. We also have spotlight schools. These are schools who are consistently high performing year over year and have already great systems in place. They've already offered to allow schools to come in and view what they're doing, and we have a relationship with them. On that website, you should be able to see all of the schools and the principal's contact information. You're welcome to reach out to them directly, or I can help you get connected to those schools. We also want to mention the school improvement planning for performance excellence that is on our website. We are also going to start a TSI newsletter that will be spotlighting some of the strategies that we have talked about here today, and some of the strategies we will be working on moving forward. So if you want to be a member of that newsletter, on the next slide there'll be a link for you to sign up for that. We also have NISL, the National Institute for School Leadership. There's a link to that for our website. We also have cognitive coaching. We do cohorts for that throughout the year. Shannon Goulet would be the contact information for that. I can give you her email and help you get connected if you're interested in cognitive coaching. Here at KDE, you all probably are aware of our principal partnership project, the P3 project. You can click on that link to see their information. And we always want to invite you all to the Continuous Improvement Summit, September 21st through the 22nd in 2026. That's a great place and conference to go to see a variety of resources for continuous school improvement, continuous district improvement, and get specific strategies that can help these targeted subgroups.
Great. Can I step in right now real quickly?
Yep.
If you all can't see me, it's Jewett Wells, Continuous Improvement Coach. I just wanted to reiterate, I know that our form is linked on the previous slide and Jenny put it in the chat as well. But in case you are not familiar with and you've never worked with us before, we are a free service. And we can go to any school or district in the state that requests our support, as long as that support is directly related to your continuous improvement planning process and your overall continuous improvement processes for the year. So please, please, please reach out to us if you're sitting there right now and think we've given you lots and lots of information today. And so you may feel a little bit overwhelmed and think, okay, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do first. I'm not really sure about how to go back and rethink about my needs assessment. That is all work that we're happy to help guide you through, sit down beside you, shoulder to shoulder, and coach you through that process. So our email addresses, there are 5 of us on the team. There are only 2 of us on the webinar today, but any of the 5 of us can come and work with you. Sometimes we go together, like more than one coach will come together. But if you are interested in that, please reach out to us. We are happy to come and sit down with you and help you work through the process, or at least figure out your next steps and who else you may want to connect with or what else you may want to do. So I just wanted to give that a little additional plug. Please don't feel bad about, asking for help. That's what we're here for, and we would love to come and help you with that work.
Thank you. I know someone asked about KDE support. Like I mentioned, we do have the continuous improvement reviews. That's from our office. However, there's offices throughout KDE that offers different support. If there's something specific that you're looking for KDE support on, feel free to reach out to me, and I can either find you a person who can offer that support, or I will be able to find you someone who can find that support for you, someone within our office. We have a form here on the screen right now. This is just our feedback form and request for additional assistance. Even if you don't need additional assistance, please go ahead and fill that out as well, because it has our plus delta, so we know what we can do to improve in the future. However, if you need additional support, feel free to fill this out. We want to be mindful of your all's time. We know you all are busy people, so if you have specific questions that you want answered around TSI, feel free to put those questions in that form as well, and I'll get back to you via email with a more specific answer, or I'll be happy to set up a call. Here's our contact information. Again, my name is Trey Smallwood. I'm the TSI consultant at the department. Ruth Swanson was here today. She's the branch manager for District 180. And Veronica Bowler, she's the CSI consultant, but also can answer any of your questions.
And real quick before we log off here, there were a couple of questions in there. So unlike CSI schools who do have specific KDE support staff assigned to them, that is not the case for TSI schools. So the list of resources and supports that Trey went over, that's what's available, and nothing is assigned. It is all based on your request. So reach out to any of those folks, you know, who you've heard today or who are on that list of resources, and let them know what they can help you with. Another question was, did you say that we should focus on one evidence-based practice? I see there's a place for 5 on the template. My suggestion was, you know, to start with one, but that's not a have to. It kind of depends on where you're at in your process. You may have already, you know, started down the road on one and you're going to add another. That's completely up to you and your team. Like I said, though, you really want to focus in on what's doable to be fully implemented, fully monitored, fully supported. So with that, please do be sure to include any specific questions, either shoot them by email to any of us or in that QR link here, there's a place for additional questions and you can put your email address in there and we can get back to you. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for our colleagues who have collaborated with us in this journey. We appreciate all your help and have a great day.